Marie and Pierre Curie. In the fall of 1891, Mary Sklodowska, a young Polish woman of 24, left her country and went to France. In Warsaw, she had been accused of plotting against the Russian rulers of Poland and had escaped from the Tsarist police. In Paris, she registered at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris, to continue her studies in physics and chemistry. She had to live in an attic, for she was very poor. To support herself while she studied, she washed bottles and watched over laboratory ovens. For 2 years, Mary Sklodowska worked and studied, sometimes spending whole nights at her attic table. She shivered with cold in the winter and grew dizzy with heat in the summer. For weeks on end, she ate nothing but bread and occasionally a piece of chocolate. But she was happy, for she could devote herself to her studies. In 1894, Mary met a Frenchman, Pierre Curie. He was a scientific genius who was working with his brother on researches in physics and electricity. Mary and Pierre Curie were drawn together not only by affection but by their passions for the same work. 18 months later, they were married. At the same time that the Curies were working at the university, a remarkable thing happened in the dark room of a Paris laboratory. A package of uranium salts, which Professor Antony Henry Becquerel put on top of a photographic plate, had left an image on the plate through the paper covering. Becquerel realized at once that the uranium salts gave out radiation. When he examined uranium ore, that is, pitchblende, he discovered that it had a much more powerful photographic action than the uranium in it would account for. He reasoned that pitchblende must contain some other element besides uranium and that this element must be more powerful. Becquerel knew the Curies. Mary had been an assistant to both men when Pierre and he had worked together. Becquerel told Mary of his discovery and asked whether she and Pierre wanted to go further on with his research. They were enthusiastic. They consulted Dmitry Mendeleev, the Russian chemist who had created a table of elements which arranged them in exact order according to their makeup. He replied from St. Petersburg that his table contained a gap in which there should be an element of the kind they described. With this encouragement, the Curies gave up all their other work to search for the new element. They were given a little shed in the courtyard of the School of Physics, a damp shack where unused machines were stored. They wrote to the Austrian government, which owned the pitchblende mines in Bohemia. The uranium salts were then used in glassmaking. A few days later, a wagon dumped a ton of pitchblende residues in front of the old shed. The Curies now began an incredibly difficult task. They spent all their days stirring up masses of boiling pitchblende with a big iron rod. The suffocating fumes turned the room into an inferno and irritated their eyes and throats, but the two scientists continued their work day after day. Mary suffered a great deal more than Pierre did. This was killing work for a woman, but she never complained and she never gave up. When the heap of pitchblende had been concentrated to 100 pounds or so, the Curies isolated a new element 300 times as active as uranium. They called it polonium after Mary's native country, but it was not the element that filled the gap in Mendeleev's table, so the fearful labor began again. On the old tables in the shed were dozens of dishes containing the new material that the Curies had found. The products in the dishes grew more and more concentrated, richer and richer than uranium. The mass had shrunk from tons to only a few grams of material now. And finally, in 1902, 45 months after she and Pierre had started their research, Mary was the first person to see in a test tube a pinch of white powder like salt. It was radium. The great goal had been reached. The Curies announced to the world the existence of the new element 2 lakh times as active as uranium. They became famous and received many honors. A few months later, in 1903, they received the Nobel Prize in Physics along with Becquerel, the man who had started them in their research for the new element. Mary was happy. Her first daughter, Irene, born during the grueling period of research, was 7 years old. She too was to become a famous scientist who won a Nobel Prize in chemistry. A second daughter, Eve, was born in 1904, and the next year Pierre was elected to the French Academy and named professor of physics at the Sorbonne. Now everything was going well. On a rainy April day in 1906, Pierre was crossing the street. In his preoccupied way, he came out from behind a carriage, walked into the road, and stepped right in the path of a heavy horse drawn truck. Suddenly, realizing that the horses were almost on top of him, he tried to seize the harness, but he slipped on the wet pavement and fell. The enormous 6-ton truck ran over him. Pierre Curie died instantly in the street. Mary did not allow her terrible sorrow to crush her. She turned more than ever to her work. 1 month after Pierre's death, she was given his chair of physics at the Sorbonne. In 1911, she was awarded a second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry. No one except Marie Curie has ever received two Nobel Prizes. One of the problems Marie Curie had to work out was the difficulty in obtaining pitch blende to reduce for experimentation. The pitch blende was very expensive and there was not enough money to support the project. Fortunately, during Marie Curie's two trips to the United States, the government gave her 2 grams of radium worth more than 1 lakh dollars. During the next 23 years, she worked constantly and founded the Great Radium Institute in Paris. In 1934, at the age of 67, she died of leukemia caused by long exposure to radium. The element that had given Marie Curie fame had killed her. Thanks for listening.